Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
Hi, welcome to Down with D&D. I'm Shawn Merwin, and today our co-host is Greg Marks. Greg is the content manager for the D&D Adventurers League, a prolific adventure writer for Wizards of the Coast and other publishers, the recipient of the 2019 D&D Icon Award for Lifetime Achievement from the Herald's Guild of DMs, and DM for easily thousands of players in his career. Greg, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Shawn.
So you literally just finished teaching, and now it's time to
we're squeezing this in between two classes
to D&D. It's always that's the way a D&D freelancer's life seems to be sometimes.
Yeah, especially in these COVID-19 times.
No kidding. So when you're not teaching, you are playing D&D or doing stuff D&D related. So could you tell us just for a minute about your history with D&D? You know, when did you get started and why do you keep coming back to it?
Yeah, I know on your show I've told the story of how my first D&D game when I was 6.
Yes.
So I won't go into as great a detail, but when I was about 6 years old, actually about a year before, my parents had divorced, and my dad, who was trying to interest me on weekends, heard about this thing called Gen Con.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up actually sort of by accident playing in round 2 of the D&D Open for a team that was short someone, and I was about 6.
Yep.
We did not advance.
Mm-hmm. Most valuable player, though. Right?
Yeah.
That must have been close to the first Gen Con.
It was at UW Parkside. Yeah. So it would have been about as many Gen Cons as I was old at the time, roughly.
Right.
In that neighborhood.
Six or so, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So I really got into it somewhere around about 7th grade. Mm-hmm. My dad had a year or so before, actually, I had renewed or re-mentioned my interest in D&D, and he pointed out, and I don't know why he didn't tell me before, that there was a box set, an old red box set in the attic that I could have. Oh. And so I started looking into that, got into AD&D, and then in 7th grade, one summer, the summer after 6th grade, a neighbor kid, I was spending the summer by my grandmother who had a house on a lake. Mm-hmm. And he showed up one day and he's like, "Hey, do you want to play games?" And I didn't really know this kid. And he's like, I like this game called D&D. And I'm like, "Oh, I like this game. Let's play this game." Mm-hmm. And then he found a gaming club that then really, really got me into D&D. So it turns out in the town nearby, there was a group that met every Saturday, and so we could go play D&D, and that's how I really, really got into it.
Now, was this in the Wisconsin, Lake Geneva, Milwaukee area?
Yeah, it was in a town called West Bend.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just north of Milwaukee.
So when I think of D&D in like the late 70s, early 80s, and especially like Wisconsin, that area, I just assume like everyone played D&D. Yeah.
Well, I don't know that was true. That's definitely probably not true. Right. But there's definitely, and still is, more people that play D&D in this part of the country. Mm-hmm. When you look at, as an example, so Living Greyhawk, when they divided up their regions, they did it by play numbers.
Right.
And there were only 2 or 3 states that got their own region. Mm-hmm. And when you look at Wisconsin getting its own region, and you look at the other states that got their own regions, Wisconsin's population is a lot smaller than those other states.
Yeah, just to put that in perspective, I worked in the Kioland region, which was New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. So you think of the population disparity between Wisconsin and those 3 states, and the play numbers that meant Wisconsin got its own region. So that should tell you the per capita D&D gamer in Wisconsin as opposed to the other parts of the world.
Yeah. At my previous job, someone had asked me one time, "Hey, you play D&D, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And they're like, "I do too." And I do. And like people came out of all the offices, and it was about 75% of people on the floor had played or still were actively playing D&D.
Yeah, that's
Now, mind you, they're academics, so it was a little bit more
right. It was skewed in a little
skewed,
bit in that direction. That's cool. So you got into D&D, and did you continue playing? You know, some people play and then they go away and then they come back to it. Has it been sort of a constant in your life?
Yeah, I have played D&D and other role-playing games for ever since, pretty much all the time. What I'm playing at any given time, of course, varies. D&D is always a favorite, but we've had plenty of other campaigns with different groups.
Mm-hmm. And so, you know, on a regular month, say, how often are you playing? Not even like writing or doing, but how often are you playing?
Are you counting me as DM in that?
Sure.
Okay. I would say 6 to 8.
Okay. That's quite a bit. And of course, when you're not playing, you are doing all of your writing duties or administrative duties as an AL administrator. So it's probably a 24/7. You're always on call for that.
I was just talking to someone last night who was asking about how many requests I get for things, for reviewing adventures, doing whatever for Adventures League. And I mentioned that in the time it took her to send her last text, I had gotten 2 requests.
Yep. That sounds about right. So when did you make the transition from gamer to game designer?
Well, that group that my friend had found had connections, which truthfully a lot of people did in southeastern Wisconsin, to TSR, and they were doing playtesting. So the first product that I did any work on was playtesting First Edition Unearthed Arcana.
Wow.
And so I was, in middle school, and this is the first time I really started to think seriously about whether, is this Cavalier class balanced? Is this, Barbarian class balanced? And I hadn't really, I don't know that it really occurred to me before. It used to be when I was a little kid. I mean, you just want to be as super powerful as possible, right?
Right.
You want to be the star.
Yeah.
And this idea that, oh, wait, you actually want everyone to be the star, started to creep in around that time.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the thing that really did it for me, though, was getting involved in, we mentioned it before, but getting involved in Living Greyhawk. So around the beginning of 2000 or so, when it first began, I started to get back into the RPGA, which I hadn't played in for 4 or 5 years, because they were sponsoring this Living Greyhawk thing. And that led to, writing for Living Greyhawk and meeting a lot of people through it. And my first real break was probably writing several books for Fantasy Flight's Midnight setting for 3rd edition.
Okay. And so you got started there. What was that experience like working, especially for Living Greyhawk, where it was that's a very, that's a complicated thing because you are wearing a lot of hats in terms of what you need to do in games, right? There's the community aspect, there's the adventure creation aspect, there's working with other regions to make sure everything's flowing smoothly. How did that transition go for you?
Well, it definitely got me thinking more about not only so when I would DM, I would often think about, I just need to make this cool story happen, right? I just need a handful of notes. If I was going to write something it's going to premiere at conventions all around my region, or maybe it's a core meta-regional or whatever, it's going to appear, who knows where across the country. I now had to figure out, how do you impart these ideas of this, potential awesome epic scene that I can see in my head? How do I impart that to somebody else? So suddenly clarity of writing, taking into the effect that, who knows what the group of characters is going to be. They might not have a wizard. Is there a way to solve this without arcane magic? Otherwise the party just dies. That's not a thing you want to write.
Right. Or maybe it is, but you should.
Yeah.
Remembering some of the adventures from back in those days.
Well, there was definitely a level of challenge as well that some people were looking for, but how do you put that in an adventure without, overwhelming other groups?
Yeah. So
Mhm.
you mentioned the RPGA. For those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's the Role Playing Game Association, essentially, and it was the precursor to what is now the Adventurers League in a lot of ways. They ran different campaigns, offered different adventures, and it wasn't just D&D. They offered a lot of different role
Oh
playing
yeah.
offerings and would offer convention support. And for a while, it was fee-based, right? You would pay a fee, and you would become a member of this group. The Polyhedron magazine was the newsletter / magazine of the RPGA, and it was a really interesting time to be a gamer, because that was sort of one of the only ways you, as an amateur game designer, could get your work recognized.
If you look at the people that are sort of the big names at WotC, Paizo, actually a lot of places, many of them came out of the RPGA.
Yeah.
Like if you look, it's like, so like Merle's, it was a tried member just like we were. Tulak, Mona Bullman,
Yeah,
like
Jason
all those
Bullman.
names. Yeah, I mean, Chris Tulak and Jason Bullman were the two tried members with me in Wisconsin.
Right.
If you look at Peter Lee, who works at WotC, worked on minis, worked on board games, a bunch of stuff. He's from Wisconsin too. Like a lot of people, they just hired a brand new community manager from Chicago,
okay.
who was out of Living Greyhawk.
Okay.
So,
yeah, okay,
Brandy
yeah.
just is from here.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. That goes back. Yeah, and it's funny because my first attempt at getting something published was not even D&D. It was in Torg and Paranoia.
Oh.
And I got those leads through the RPGA, where the company was West End Games, but they wanted convention adventures for those.
I wrote for
games.
Cthulhu, and I wrote for Pinnacle the same way.
Yep.
Like by playing stuff at cons that people would play with you. In many ways, it was a great way to network, right? Because you'd sit down at a table with someone and you'd spend 4 hours with them. And it wasn't so much that they would, automatically know you're a great writer, but they would at least know that you were someone they could probably work with, right? For at least on one project.
Right. If you can go through the rigors of getting an adventure in a form that can be spread among DMs through the RPGA, through Adventurers League, that is at least recognition that you have done it at least once.
Yeah.
And that's better than
you met some deadline somewhere, you turned over product.
Yeah.
And if they're lucky and actually played it with you, they might even learn, hey, you're reasonable to talk to. They get to try you out or demo you in a way before they ever actually have to like potentially offer you a job.
Yeah. And it's funny, you talked about the Unearthed Arcana, and I think back, I think of now how people, kind of the expectations people have for getting third-party material or splat books or Wizards, supplements. Back in the day, I remember when Unearthed Arcana came out, this was pre-internet, right? But there was a mix of outrage and joy that is not even comparable to what we see today, right? Some of the old school players were like, "Why are you ruining my D&D game with this
options
book with these other options? Everything I need is here. You money grubbing so and so's. How dare you?" Where everyone else, and then you had the group of, finally, I get to play something other than these 8 classes. And
look, especially because there were, it was this idea that when you had the original D&D, right, you could be a fighter, you could be a wizard, you could be a thief, you could be a cleric, and that's pretty much it, right? I mean, they had the racial classes, but they were basically derivatives of the others.
Right.
But there are other iconic, like, I want to be the ranger, right? Like there was Token out there with Middle Earth and stuff. And, I want to be the druid. I want to be these variations of these other classes.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, totally. Very, very popular with the set that wanted to do something else.
Right. And then the methods of attribute
Oh, yeah.
creation. Well, if you were a fighter, roll 9d6 or barbarian or whatever it was,
Yeah.
rather than the 46. But if you were, you only rolled 3d6, to get your intelligence or whatever. And that was, I remember that again being very divisive in the world of D&D back then. And now it's like you can go online and trip over thousands of free or very cheap products that are ubiquitous,
and many of them are quite good.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Some of them are, but a lot of them are.
Also true.
So when you switched over from playing to DMing, I'm always interested in hearing this as well, especially with people who have done a lot of writing and a lot of DMing. How did that transition go for you from player to DM?
Well, so that group that I had met in high school that was playing in West Bend, they were sponsoring a convention called Midsummer Revel. So, which later morphed into Milwaukee Summer Revel and is
still going on.
It's still going on. It's in the there's been I think there might be 30 of them now. I don't know. It's well up there. It's one of the more longer continuous running conventions. So they sponsored it, and I wanted to go, and my parents were okay with that, but they weren't going to pay for it. They were going to give me like $5 or something a day, which was going to maybe buy me some food.
Right.
And so I needed to figure out how to get in. And if you ran an adventure every day, your badge was free. And so I'm like, okay, well, I've played for a bit, and I've been at least at home scribbling on a notebook, ideas for adventures and stuff, drawing out maps with my, DMG, and because they had to random generate your dungeon.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm like, all right, I can do this. I'm gonna show up and DM at this con, just randomly, and get a free badge.
Nice.
And it went really well.
Good.
Actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's better than some stories I've heard or told myself.
Yeah, I think part of it was overwhelming enthusiasm, but also I had a lot of good role models. People in Wisconsin will remember some of them, but like I played with Keith Polster, you might know, Kevin Malka, some of the folks that did a lot of writing in the early years of the RPGA, Todd Lang, John Kugath. I don't know if any of those ring a bell to you because you were East Coast, but I'd seen a lot of different people run adventures, and I had kind of come up with this, what made me happy when they did it. And I'm like, I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to do what makes me happy. And then hopefully other people will be. Yeah.
And so were you running something you had written, or were you running a published adventure?
So at that particular one, I hadn't run anything that I had written. We were given adventures to run. So we're like, here are some of them were ones that the con had written, and we're having like 2 or 3 tables run at a time. Gotcha. Some of them were RPGA adventures. So I was handed a thing that I got to read over and use.
Okay. Yeah, that is a bit of a different experience than creating your own stuff and seeing how it goes.
Yeah, and I had started doing that like at home a little bit, and this gave me the impetus to try and run for other people at home. But in some ways, I was less concerned about running for a group of strangers than I was for the people that I was going to see regularly. Yeah, I was because if they're unhappy, well, I still have to see them every week. Right. But if these other people were unhappy, I'm like, we'll muddle through for a few hours, then hopefully I'll never see them again.
That's true. And that's going to lead us into our main topic today, which is tips for DMing 5e. So when I think of DMing skills, I think of the DMs who used to travel in that RPGA Adventurers League type of circuit, right? Because at just one convention, these DMs might deal with 4 different adventures, 50 or more different players just in one weekend. And when I think of that, I think of Greg, because Greg has been DMing at conventions for, I don't want to say 30 years, but definitely over 20 years. And Greg's learned a thing or two about running games while DMing for those hundreds and thousands of players over the years. So I wanted Greg to come on to the show and talk about DMing tips. whether you're DMing for a home group, DMing for an organized play campaign like the Adventures League, or just DMing in public at a game store for a one-shot convention. So, Greg, can you talk a little bit about some of the tips and tricks and skills for DMs that you've learned over the years?
Sure. Let's build off that last thing that I was just talking about.
Okay.
So when you think about DMs, I kind of break them down into sort of 3 styles, and I guess I want to champion one as being better than the other 2.
Okay.
So some DMs are adversarial, and they see the game as a meme versus you, and either I win or you win. And I'm very against that, because the whole point is that it is literally a game, right? We're not playing for money. We're playing to have a good time.
Okay.
There's also some folks that see themselves as the impartial adjudicator. Okay. So like, I'm going to roll dice in front of you. Oh, you crit, I crit, you all die. It just, that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Mm-hmm. And like, I guess there is some fair play aspect to that. Mm-hmm. But in many ways, I think what you want to be is the facilitator. Mm-hmm. Like, your goal is for everyone to have fun. Like, regardless of the play style of the players, they want to murder a lot of stuff. They're murder hobos. They want to explore. They want to do social. They want to do whatever it is. If you especially think about a convention, people paid a lot of money. Mm-hmm. They paid to travel. They bought a hotel room. They bought a badge. They bought tickets. They spent a ton of money, and you are there essentially as a worker, right? You're a face of the convention, and they are in some way compensating you, whether it's badge or hotel or whatever, mm-hmm. to make sure those people have fun. Mm-hmm. So if you get a group and they really love, dungeon crawling and hack and slashing stuff, and maybe it's not your deal, in some ways it's kind of your job to do that anyway, right? Sure. Like, it's what they paid for. It's right. What they're hoping for. And within the limits of what you can do, right? Like, if you're running a convention adventure, it has sort of a plot already set. Right. But yeah.
You can deviate, but you can't go and write your own adventure within that. Yeah. So what you're kind of talking about there is a social contract. I feel like
sure.
when you're DMing for a show, especially if you're getting compensated, like you said, a badge or whatever, there is a social contract that says the players' enjoyment is something that is we could say of greater value than normal, than if you're running a home game at your house where your friends are coming and eating your food, and and at that point the social contract is different. At that point, the social contract for a home game should be established early. And it's, how are we going to run this? And as long as everyone agrees and continues with that social contract, everyone should be happy with your DMing.
Yeah, don't be afraid to literally just ask, what do you like? Mm-hmm. So that's a thing I think that people are sometimes hesitant to ask, mm-hmm. and also hesitant to sort of lay down some expectations, right? Mm-hmm. Like, one of my players says, I really like the chance to, have my backstory come up. Mm-hmm. Okay. So especially in a home game, I can find some way to work that in, right? We can adjust, mm-hmm. and your long lost grandfather turns out to have been, the reason he never came back because he's kidnapped by the bad guy. And now you have this like reason to go into the dungeon to try and rescue him.
Right.
Bringing those sorts of discussions up front will make sure everyone has more fun. And especially in a home game, assumedly, you're at least acquaintances, right? You at least sort of know each other. So you all want to have fun. Yeah. Like, hopefully your goal isn't to make someone suffer.
Yeah. After you've played 20 games with Bob or with Jenny or with whoever, you probably know their play style. It's interesting to sit down with a group of strangers at a public play arena, and you can ask, what do you like to do? Some people are shy and they just like, oh, whatever. I always like to look for clues in short interactions to try to figure out what kind of player they are and deliver that play style without them having to ask.
Character introductions.
Yeah.
That's your hint, right?
Yeah.
Do they tell you that they carry a giant axe.
Mhm.
Okay, this person likes to hit things with their axe.
Yes.
Do they tell you about the colors of their clothes and their, how they smile? Or okay, they're going to want to do social stuff.
Mhm.
You can pick up a lot of those details, right with the character introduction.
Yeah.
You also sometimes, the way I see some people have spent 20 hours personally painting their mini,
Mhm.
where other people have like, this die is going to be me.
Yeah.
It does kind of tell you about how much they're involved in the development of their character.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And even like what kind of character sheet they have, how they arrange their dice, right? Do they have different dice for different spells?
Oh yeah.
Right. Or, these are my fireball dice. These are my, whatever spell you want it to say, dice, or, these are the dice when I have advantage, and these are the dice when I have disadvantage. And they'll say that right at the table, right? They'll put their things out, and those little things can tell you how focused on combat, how focused on the rules they are, as opposed to the person who sings their clan's battle song during character introductions.
Yep.
You know that if you start bringing their clan up at different points, they're going to be overjoyed to share that backstory.
Yeah. It's always good to know if you can figure it out quickly. Like, did people come as a group? Because the people who came as a group, they're going to entertain themselves regardless of what you do. So just trying to play off their group is pretty valuable.
Yeah, just kind of get out of the way.
Yeah.
or be the straight man, right?
Yeah. Or if 5 people came and they have one person who randomly got sat there, then it kind of becomes your job to make sure the one person isn't forgotten.
Right. So just in terms of somebody who is a brand new DM, right? They've never DM'd before. They've played a bit, but they think they want to get into DMing. What are some of the basics of how to run a game smoothly? Is there anything that you have that would give them a quick introduction?
Are we thinking more along the lines of a home game, or are we thinking more along the lines of a convention game, or
really
any
just in general? What
okay.
what are some things that you would suggest to kind of be aware of, or this is going to be your go-to thing that you're going to do for your entire DMing career?
I'm sure you've heard this before, but the yes and or yes but is very powerful. Right? Enable the player to do the thing they want to do within the limits of the story. So you want to I want to try to kick down this door. Oh yes. And when you do that, you also discover insert thing that the adventure wanted you to find. Or the yes, but I need you to, it's locked. And so when you go to kick it, you bounce off it. So you're going to either need to figure a way to pound the door down, or maybe, use your roguish skills or whatever. The ability to let them try is always valuable. But, and I've seen this with some adversarial DMs, don't not give them an idea of the odds. So I want to try and talk the dragon into giving me his hoard. Oh yeah, totally. You can absolutely try that. Give me your deception check. Oh, you got a 42. Well, that fails because there's no chance. And so now he's angry.
Gotcha.
The idea of like giving the player, letting them trap themselves is a poor idea. I think it just makes the player unhappy. If they had known that there was no chance, because it's obvious. I mean, if it's obvious, not barring, background information they don't know. Right. I think it's kind of a poor game to do that.
Yeah, I think there's always this friction between D&D as a game and D&D as a storytelling vehicle that DMs often have trouble with, even experienced ones, when they want to either make the game something interesting but it hurts the story, or make the story something interesting but it hurts the game, like hiding information that a player or a character might know That's always a rough one for me. It's like, make a DC 20 history check when you see this painting and they fail. And it's super important information for the story. So hiding it behind that check, especially a difficult check, is counterintuitive to me.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that in some adventures that I've been working on, as to having there be, if it's critical, having there either be it's just given to you, or that there's multiple ways to get it throughout the story. So if, for example, seeing the painting lets you realize something about the family's history that helps you solve the mystery that's going on, then maybe also talking to the staff could, one of the staff members also knows this, having worked in the house for years. Or maybe, going through their personal belongings, the dead person's belongings, you could also discover a letter that would let you find this. This now gives you 3 routes by which this important clue can be revealed.
Right.
And, makes it a lot more likely it's going to happen, but also gives you something to play with if they fail, right? Gives you ways in which you can funnel alternative ways to search for the clue.
How do you come down on the fudging of die rolls?
Oh, you absolutely should. I'm 100% in favor.
Yeah. Why is that?
So 2 reasons, both for and against your players, and they're all about fun. So I think there are things that are anticlimactic that are not necessarily fun that can happen because of a die roll, like a sort of like save or die situation where you've had this campaign that's been going for years, and they get to the final guy, and this fight is what you have planned tonight, and in round 1 something happens where a weird confluence of events and one die roll basically says, all right, after 5 minutes you've ended the entire campaign. I would probably fudge that, just because the players have been building up that this is going to be this epic fight,
right? And
I wouldn't want to disappoint them. But also the same thing, a lot of times players will do something, they'll come up with something that's super inventive and is a really great idea. And then maybe, if they could just roll a 3 or higher, they're gonna be able to do it based on the math of the game. And then they roll a 2. I want to at least give them, some level of success. Like, oh, okay, well, you didn't quite pull off the epic move, but you still succeeded some.
Okay.
Yeah. That idea of rewarding a great idea without having the die roll have to always come out, I think is pretty valuable.
Yeah. I mean, there have been times when I have just said, don't bother rolling. Even if it's not like a 50-50 chance, because the idea is so good and it moves the story ahead so well that it's more valuable to the game itself, both the game and the story, to just let it succeed.
Yeah.
And then sometimes failure can be great.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Either the NPC's failure or the player's character failures.
There are times where story assumes, a certain level of ability, and both the characters they're just not up to it. Well, that doesn't mean that the story has to end, right? You run away to fight another day, or you're captured, but then when you're captured, they bring you into the dungeon. So now you've gotten past all the traps, you've gotten past all of the the wandering monsters, and you're in the bad guy's inner sanctum, and now you just have to figure out how to get past this locked door of this room they threw you in, and you're right back in it without having to do the sneaking part that maybe you weren't going to be that great at anyway.
Yeah.
That failure can give you a whole nother story that still gets you where you want to go.
One thing I've seen DMs have trouble with are sort of the mechanical jobs of DMing, keeping initiative, keeping track of conditions. Do you have any tips, or how do you handle that smoothly?
So I've played with different ways to handle initiative for many different ways. The way I currently do now, I actually learned at a convention from a fellow I met in Chicago. What he does is he writes everyone's initiative in a circle in the order in which they're sitting at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets a piece of paper, puts them in a circle, and then when everyone goes, first round, draw a line under their particular initiative.
Okay.
Second, draw, around the side, and basically draw a box, eventually draw a box once everyone has gone 4 times.
Okay.
And then he starts to draw like a, 45-degree rotated box, so like a diamond around.
Okay.
And just keep drawing bigger and bigger rotated boxes around each person, one side at a time. And then what I also do is if they have a condition, I usually write, so what I'll do is where I'm seated, I will write my monsters sort of in the order of their initiative, and I'll just write next to their name if they have a condition, and then cross it out or put little tick marks for how long they have it or something like that when it's gone.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a perfect way. I will say that some groups do a really good job of nominating one player to be in charge. I also like the putting like little tents on your screen in the order in which people are going to go, but I usually don't like a screen.
Yeah, we short people don't like screens as much.
I run it a lot at cons and at con tables with, up to 7 people at a table.
Yeah.
Space is a premium, and the screen takes up too much real estate.
Yeah. So were there any other tips or tricks or things to be aware of for new DMs, some pitfalls? I know what I was going to ask. You're a teacher. How often do the skills that you have used in the classroom as a teacher translate to DMing?
Oh, all the time. I think it's back and forth. In both cases, you are presenting to a group, right? And you're trying to keep them as interested as possible.
Yeah.
So I have been a college professor, and right now I teach high school at a very a school for pretty gifted people. And but you still need to keep their attention, right, regardless of the age.
Right.
And so that level of volume control, voice control, being dynamic, making sure everyone's involved is way key. As is making sure that you are clear, right? Can you explain what you're trying to explain so that everyone can picture it and follow? Totally very, very similar skills. The ability to write down a few small notes and use that to still talk for an hour or two, right?
Right.
Is totally key, as is the ability to pivot. So, and this is a suggestion I have for new DMs. Do not let the adventure constrain you. If the story goes in another way, you can often find a way to come back to the story, right? So if they want to go to town, and going back to town is not even really ever considered, there's really no reason they can't, unless the story specifically says that they can't go back for some reason. Yeah. Then sure, let them go back to town. Let them, maybe that's a good opportunity. And that same thing happens in teaching, right? You will have some student, but what about this? And if it's not too wildly far astray, it's, they're interested. They want to know a thing. We might as well talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, the transitions, I think, are often important too in DMing, where if you are, you're in a role-playing section, but you're about to go into a section that's more based on rules, whether it's combat or exploration, like you're making skill checks and stuff, having phrases or having even motions that that tell the players, all right, I am now doing like this motion with my hand, so that means something is changing, or I use this phrase, right? What do you do, right? What do you do is always an important phrase in D&D, or how do you do that?
That's the famous I don't know, what do you think sort of teacher response, right?
Right.
The you tell me, which is the same as the what do you do in D&D.
Right. I'm done telling my portion of the story now. It is time for you to take up the storytelling mantle or the game mantle and tell me what's happening. I've never thought of it that way. The old Socratic method of getting to an answer. Sure.
It's totally the same. Like I can just tell you the answer, or I could just tell you what your character does.
Right.
But I don't want to. I want you to think for yourself, and I want to share this experience with you of us learning about either, in this case, the story and instead of chemistry.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Nice. So
also time management, by the way.
Oh,
make sure that you do time management.
Yes, that is probably, especially if you're running games at a convention, the most important thing, because people who are poor at time management, and I can't say I'm always the best. The first few times I ran games at conventions, it's a 4-hour slot. I got lots of time. Oh,
I have no time.
there's 20 minutes left in the slot, and we still have 2 combat encounters to go. Whoopsie. So yes, you have to learn quickly that sort of self-pacing and to be aware of time, even as you are not aware of time at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially at a convention when, at the end of your slot, someone else is going to come to that table and play there. Mm-hmm. And all your players probably have something scheduled, right? Like they need to go. They have something they're doing.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great point.
Just like teaching. They have another class to go to. You got to make sure you're on time.
Yeah. That's awesome. So any other final tips or things to be aware of for DMs?
Communicate. Don't be afraid and communicate. Talk to people, see what, get tips from other people, talk to your players, see what they like. And, if somebody tells you, I really don't like when a DM does something, do what you can to avoid doing that, at least with them. Mm-hmm. See what it is. You will, like any experience lots and lots of different play styles and sort of develop what works well for you.
Awesome. So thank you, Greg. I'm going to do some Patreon shout outs here. Thank you so much to our patrons, Jim Fitzpatrick, Joseph Peralta, Merrick Blackman, Mike Amur, Ninjabi, the Rainmaker, Rich Ruane, Rory McLeod, and Savannah Sizer. And if you would like to support the show, there are many ways you can help us. For just $1 a month, you can help our Patreon at www.patreon.com/MMP to help us pay our costs of hosting and editing and so on. For that $1, you get access to special content from Down with D&D, MMP, and Pandas Talking Games. Or if you can't help us with any cash, we understand it's rough times these days. Just give us a review on Twitter or Facebook, whatever medium that you use to listen or to talk about games. Talking about us on social media is a huge help. Speaking of social media, Greg, where can people find you or follow your work?
If you want to know about myself and the other admins for the D&D Adventures League, you can go to our website, dndadventuresleague.org, and find out about getting games there. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ScareAtTheGreen, except the is spelled 7H3.
Because that's not confusing at all.
I regret it every day.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin. I regret most of my life, but that's just my name. Or you can go to the forums, forums.misdirectedmark.com, and chat with all of us about D&D or whatever games that you are playing. Down with D&D is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. Hey, Greg, what are we going to do now?
Pretty sure we're going to go kill some monsters.
Yes, we are.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Get down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?
This whole party.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
You down with D&D?
Yeah, you know me.
I'm down with D&D.
Yeah, you know me.
Who's down with D&D?